Thanks for tuning in. We're Ace Comicals. I have with me my co-host Rahul Jani and Leon Everett. I'm Greg Driver. Let's get started. Hi guys, welcome to Ace Comicals episode 002. Today we're here to talk about the recent return of the Wakandan King, T'Challa the Black Panther. And this show is going to take us through the first collected volume in the current Ta-Nehisi Coates and Brian Stelfreeze run. So I guess we should start with a plot overview. So this book collects the first 4 issues and the first ever appearance of the Black Panther, which was Fantastic Four number 52 from July 1966. The main plot of these first 4 issues deals with the fact that Wakanda is not in a happy place at the moment. It's almost in the midst of revolution, or it's like a revolution brewing. You've got civil unrest. People aren't happy with their king. Their former queen is dead, so which is why T'Challa's had to return, because his sister was in charge. She died. He's had to come back from doing his avenging business around the world, and it's now he's sort of detached from his country, and the people aren't happy with the fact that it's an autocracy anymore. While he's been gone, it kind of feels like some of the chiefs elsewhere in Wakanda have been taking advantage of their power, and you know, after various different terrible things that have happened to the country, it's just not in a good place. You've had floods, you've had, courtesy of Namor, you've had Doctor Doom waging war on Wakanda, and amidst all of this as well, you've got the neighbouring nation, Uganda, plotting to kind of, while Wakanda's weak, they're sort of plotting to stick the spear in and twist it a little bit, and you've got a couple of interesting dudes on that side of the story as well. So it drops you right in the middle, and it's a very, very, very interesting place to be. So I guess I will start with what we knew about Black Panther coming into this. So I'll start with you, Rahul. What did you know about Black Panther, if anything, before coming into this and reading this volume?
Right, I knew very little about Black Panther before coming into this. I think, I was aware that he was a character in the Marvel Universe, but I had never read anything about him. And then my first proper exposure was from the Civil War film, spoilers, where Black Panther arrives, and he's quite a prominent figure in the film. And I think that's what led me to being interested in this particular comic, because it coincides with his appearance in Civil War. Overall impressions with the comic, like you said, there's a lot going on, and it kind of starts in media res, which anything to do with politics I find particularly confusing to follow. So I think I'm going to need to give it another read. But I like the style, I like the artwork. It's got some really interesting characters, and I can't wait to see where it's going to end up. And I'd like to hear what you guys think, because it might help clear up some plot issues for me.
Leon?
Going in, I had quite a limited exposure to Black Panther. I'd known of him, known some of the context, being one of the first, if not the first, mainstream black superhero. I knew sort of the rough idea and context behind him, being like a king and having his own nation. But otherwise, it was quite limited. I hadn't read any Black Panther, and sort of actually seeing what his character was like the first time I was exposed to that was also in the Civil War film last summer. With him, I knew that in contrast to other sort of black superheroes around the time, say, for instance, Luke Cage, whereas Luke Cage, while being awesome, did embody some hangovers, stereotypes from being born of the blaxploitation era, that Black Panther is quite a contrast to that in terms of being, as being one of the most wise superheroes, and also regal and head of his own nation, which happens to be the most advanced on the planet. So I always thought that was quite interesting, how they've gone to Africa, a continent known for being third world and deprived in many ways, and they've created a society there that is more advanced than the rest of the planet. So I always thought that was really interesting. And in prep for this episode, I did go back and read some of the Jungle Action issues, especially the stuff where Black Panther goes down south and ends up fighting the KKK, which I thought was quite interesting. So it seemed like he's been a useful conduit for allowing Marvel to tell some socially conscious stories back in the 70s and so on. It seems, as he seems to have been a character that a lot of interesting Black writers have had a chance to use, such as Priest and Hudlin. And now Coates. And what really got me excited about this particular comic, this run, is I'm a fan of Coates' writing, his journalistic work and political writing in The Atlantic, and also a fan of his books. So when I heard that Marvel got him writing a Black Panther comic, and as Rahul said, it was coming out around the time of the movie as well, it felt like a great marriage and the perfect time for me to jump on board. My overall impressions with these first 4 issues, it drops you off in the middle of the story, and things are going on, and loads of names and events that have happened in the past are referenced. And I'll start off with my negative to get that out of the way, that I think that even though it feels like it is done by design, as it seems that he could have retconned and started afresh and done what he wanted and had which characters he wanted, as there are some popular Black Panther characters who are dead at the start of this from the past events that Greg mentioned earlier. But what I respect, and having read it a second time and seeing sort of the intent behind it, I can understand why things start off so dizzying and confusing. And it's because he didn't retcon it, because he wanted that history to be there and to weigh on every character, especially T'Challa. So I think while it does drop you in the deep end, and I think that will be a bit of a barrier for newer readers, I do think part of it suffers because of that, and that might be down to some teething issues with learning the form. But I feel that even over the course of the 4 issues, that element gets better, and he sort of steps aside with his words and leaves it more to the artists. And I think with that you get a clearer understanding and view of what's happening. Going on the positives in my impressions, I think it's very effective in building a troubled Wakanda. It feels like a nation of unrest, and despite all these technological advances, it feels like it has income and economic disparity, just like every other advanced nation. And I think what I really like is how nuanced the characters are. Without getting into specifics, each character, whether they're the good guy or the bad guy type characters, everyone has shades of grey and is imperfect, and it feels like everybody is doing what they think is right. There doesn't seem to be any mustache twirling, even from characters who are set up to feel like the most evil. It feels like everyone has a wider goal, and for the most part, it seems that wider goal is actually something egalitarian and something that would be beneficial to Wakanda as a whole. So I think that is really interesting and a really smart way to attack a story like this.
I think you've pretty much covered it, Leon, as far as my first impressions go as well, because I had pretty much similar experience to you being dropped into it. Having not read an awful lot of Black Panther solo comics, like most of my exposure to Black Panther has been through Avengers comics or, otherwise where he's appeared as like a guest character kind of thing. And prior to this, I've read those very same comics you have, those old jungle action issues from the 70s. And even like you were mentioning about them using him as a conduit to discuss issues, I think there's some stuff from, I think it might be the 80s run, where they deal with, they send him to apartheid South Africa, and there's like a section where he's in apartheid South Africa, I think. But yeah, it drops you right in the middle, but it's like a very interesting place to be, I think. And although it's kind of jarring, and on first read bits can seem confusing and things you might not understand, when you go back through it again, you can kind of see that it all just sort of slots into place. If you do like a secondary read and you flick through it again and you look at bits and you think, it actually makes sense that he's done what he's done. And although you may think things aren't explained, it doesn't necessarily need to be.
Well, can I ask a question then? Because So it definitely is a continuation and not a reboot or a reimagining of the character fresh, correct?
It's
Yeah.
definitely a continuation because of the fact that it takes into account everything that has happened previously, and there's no total reboot. It's not a fresh character because his sister's still there. She's still in the City of the Dead.
Yeah. See, because I think I wasn't aware of all the pre-established characters, and I went in thinking that it was a reintroduction for new readers, which clearly it wasn't. But the thing that confused me was I was under the impression that it was a green T'Challa, like he was new to this, and it was like seeing how he grew into the Black Panther that we know, for example, from the films. And I guess it's quite the opposite. He's got a weight of history behind him. He's got a weight of being this wise king, and now he's struggling to rule over this kingdom which is fractured. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the guy who this is T'Challa, who has left, has been part of the Avengers, has saved the universe, and has constantly left Wakanda. And as different elements have brought up, stuff has happened in that time, and he's back now, and the Great Wakanda, the unconquerable nation, is breaking at the seams.
Yeah, because I'd say then that I would agree with the brief negatives that you guys picked on, in that it doesn't actually mention anywhere that he's been a part of the Avengers all this time, or he's been away from the country, or maybe I just glossed over it.
Well, that stuff is in there. I just think that the way it starts doesn't really give you a full indication, but then a lot of characters he speaks to, such as his mum and other people, do add that layer. But I think the beginning is quite dizzying that you might miss that stuff.
Right, yeah.
No, yeah, it's with the like, you know, when they these like pre-established characters and everything else, it's I can see why it'd be quite jarring for you with all the names being thrown around and not understanding like what each part is and everything else. So what we're looking at here is a nation that is really detached from its leader. They don't really recognise him anymore. He's been gone. He's come back, as we've already mentioned multiple times, and now you've got like total disillusion with the monarchy. Like the people themselves are unhappy with the fact that it's one man in charge. They're starting to think, hold on a second, you know, we're a really advanced nation. Why are we still dealing with like outdated politics, you know, pomp and circumstance and everything else? We don't necessarily need this. We should have a Wakanda for the people, which is like a big line in the story, I guess. And this is why you've got like all these he's got this he's got like a ceremonial honor guard. They're like ceremonial wives. They're called the Adored Ones, or Dora Milaje, I think it is, isn't it? Is that correct, guys? Yeah, Dora Milaje.
I think that's what we established.
And those guys, basically, since he's been gone, sort of they've kind of gone rogue a little bit. You've got one of them that has been put in prison for executing one of the tribal chiefs he's like abusing his influence and everything else, and he's just being a general very nasty person. He's, you know, a rapist and everything else, and he's totally abusing his power, and she kills him for it. Now she gets arrested for that and has to stand trial, and she gets sentenced to execution. Now one of the other honor guard, which is like her lover, frees her, and these two are now going around as a pair of vigilantes. And those two are almost attempting to instigate a revolution. They're going around taking down tribal leaders, freeing people from the influence, from the tyranny, and then saying they're basically stating that Wakanda should not be ruled by one man. And all of this is going on, and poor T'Challa's trying to hold his country together. And amidst all of this as well, he's got trouble coming over the border from his neighbouring nation, which is Uganda, and those guys have always had a bone to pick with the Wakandans. They've never liked the Wakandans, and they're seeing this as like a sort of a prime opportunity. You've got two interesting characters there as well, which are kind of like the main villains of the book. You've got a shaman called Tatu, who has the power to control nature, and you've got a woman called Sens, who can bring out people's intentions. Like if she can like seems to be able to isolate an emotion and then bring it to the forefront and work on it. So she can isolate the anger in the Wakandans and bring it up to the surface to create civil unrest, which is what happens at the beginning of this book, where it starts in the midst of like a riot at the Great Mound, which is like the vibranium mound in Wakanda, where everyone gets their vibranium from their technology. Vibranium being the metal which is what makes Wakanda basically, and what makes it the most advanced place on Earth. He's less adored than in previous incarnations. The people, he's got some work to do. Basically, he's got to win the trust back of his nation, I think, and that's the whole point I'm trying to make with this one. Looking at the creative team behind this book, Coates, Stelfreeze, and Martin. We already know Leon's a fan of Coates, but what did you know, Ray, coming into it? Have you encountered any of their work before, or
not at all? I mean, I might go into this a little bit later, but I'm a big fan of Coates now after having been introduced to his work through this comic. As for the art, I really like what Stelfreeze does with a lot of the shading in this. I mean, it's a weird one because I find that it looks much like any other comic, especially in the Marvel set, but he does some really interesting things with like lighting and contrast and silhouette. There's a bunch of scenes where there's two prominent figures talking in front of a fire, and all of their features are dropped into silhouette, but you can see various like tribal tattoos or technologically based tattoos highlighted in the fire, and I really like some of those aspects. Or there's this like a wise lecturer character, and there's some scenes where his face is framed by his white dreadlocks, but his face is purely in silhouette, and I think there's some interesting artistic choices there.
I like his artistic choices in the way that if you've seen any of the original sort of like Jack Kirby Black Panther stuff, like the way back when it was like when he first appeared in the Fantastic Four comics, that kind of thing, you can see the influence in some of the way he draws the technology. So when you look at the way the masks peel back off the faces in some of the panels, and you've got all these different lines and circles and stuff like that, that's a very very Kirby tech thing, I think, and it's like it goes back to that psychedelic Kirby artwork that I love. And
it's almost like a printed circuit board, like peeling away from their face.
And even with the tattoos that they have underneath, like some of these characters have like facial tattoos and stuff, and it's the same kind of thing. I think the tattoos are probably maybe some kind of implant. I'm not sure how that works in this, but yeah, they look, because there's points where they glow. It just looks very very Kirby-esque, like the Celestials. When Kirby draws like these big characters from outer space and whatever, and it's just that kind of it's the little.
But yeah, I do like that it's
the little nods that I like, and I like.
Yeah, and I like that it's not clear that it's either tech or it's tattoo or it's part of something they've implanted or whatever.
I like that the tech is still. It still feels like old world. So the way they do everything, the tech's there, but it doesn't feel like tech. It still feels like tribal. So the way I mean the suits that the two Rogue, Dora, and Milache wear, the Midnight Angels, the suits that the Midnight Angels wear, it still feels very tribal, even though it's like really really high tech, and they're like high tech prototypes. And I do like some of the colouring and the colours are, the colour choices, the palettes used and whatever. It's really really quite a gorgeous book actually, especially the way they draw, the way fire and things like that are represented, and the way that these the sky, I guess, in this book. If we go into some of the panels and we look at the sky, like where the way the way the night sky has been inked in, and when you've got like these sunsets and you've got like these like panels where it's just like a great plain, like later on like a desert, like but even though it is just a section of desert and it's just dry and it's nothing, like the sky in the background, it's not an empty panel,
Yeah,
it's a very romantic view of like the African landscape, I think, which I really like. That
panel could be dead empty. That's just a desert. That panel could just be like orange. They didn't need to do anything special with it, but they did, and it all the better for it, I think.
Yeah, there's this one page where I think towards the end of issue 2, perhaps, where we see like a landscape of the plains and all these big rocks jutting out from the ground in front of a lake or a river, and yeah, it's just gorgeous. All the coloring is really nice.
I mean, like, before coming into this, I didn't have much of a knowledge of Coates or Stelfreeze myself. I know that Stelfreeze has worked in comics for a long, long time, and I've seen some of his work and whatever, but it's not... I guess all of these guys, for me, I mean, they're not people that were, like, initially on my radar. I know Coates has never written for comics before, and I have read a couple of his articles and stuff since, but it's like, you know, considering that he's never actually written for comics before, I think he's turned his hand to it quite well. And I like this partnership, actually. I think they work well together, and I know that Stelfreeze is the pro here, and he's probably leading Coates a little bit and teaching him the ropes and everything else. But I still think that it's a very good partnership, and I think I look forward to more content from these two. I don't know if you guys agree or.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to some of the praise that you guys have been bestowing on Stelfreeze. I agree with everything that you guys have said. I think his art is really like sharp and defined and very clear from panel to panel, which I quite like. He's able to convey a lot in minimal frames, and like in the start of issue 1, before we've even had the title splash page, there's an image, and this is like page 1, and it's Black Panther on his knees, and behind him is the page is split into 3 vertical panels, and on the left we have his dad. In the middle, we have Namor, like half submerged, and on the right we have the Dora Milaje sort of turning their back. And in those 3 panels, there is narration there, but it's very short narration. But I think those 3 panels are done in like very different art styles, and at the same time are able to convey so much. It's like a cool montage scene or at the beginning of a film, just done so effectively. One thing that I picked up on that is backed up from an interview that we'll put in the show notes, where it's Ta-Nehisi Coates talking at a DC comic shop for about 2.5 hours, but he has a lot of cool insights into their working relationship. And his main thing he was saying is that his main job was, and he got better at it as he went along, was learning to get out of the way of Stelfreeze and Martin. So to create his story, edit his dialogue, like trim it down so that it remained as visual as possible, and then just hand it over to the art team, and then just leave it over to them. And as Greg was saying, you can feel that partnership there as a team. It just seems so effective. There doesn't seem to be a battle like you can often see, where like you've got this great bit of art, but half of the panel is taken up by narration or a speech bubble. And in this, there feels like a nice, especially from issue 1, which is crazy considering that it's all their first time working together. But it is quite effective, and I think it helps propel the story going on. I just want to say a few things about Martin before I drop into Coates. I think like Laura Martin, her colors are really like expressive. And one thing that I super noticed, I mean, it's really apparent in the daytime scenes, especially the ones in the main Wakandan city, the capital, where everything's sort of like glowing. I mean, you've got like standard sort of African like tones, but they're all like Technicolor and bright. But it's the nighttime scenes that I think are really effective, because a lot of the time that it can be quite hard to see really and make out details. But I think a lot of the sequences are very clear and clean. Another thing that I'm quite appreciative of is how well Stelfreeze and Martin work together with all the characters. Like the character design, I think, is really interesting. The different hairstyles used. as Rahul mentioned, Stelfreeze's framing. I think Martin's use of like different hair and skin tones, the color used with like the tattoos as they effectively glow in the dark for us, I think are very effective and help solidify this world of like technological advancement and excess, but also one that is very human and going through a lot of issues at the moment. Like what I was
saying earlier, technological excess steeped in tradition. So it's kind of a weird marriage, but it's I think it's quite a good one, to be honest. I think it works nicely.
Definitely tug of war.
And one of the things that you mentioned, Leon, the like the range of skin tones, I was really impressed by throughout the entire thing. Although you mentioned hairstyles, and like that's something I didn't really consciously pick up on. But yeah, you're right. There's so many different, like it's such an important way to define and vary the characters. And I think that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to look through it again and see all the different variants. Yeah. It's cool.
That's kind of cool. That is. I picked that up myself actually at points where there's like people, and I picked up again like the way they draw with the nighttime scenes or with scenes in low light, you know, like the reflection of the light on the characters themselves and things like that. And I thought that was really good.
Yeah, the lighting is fantastic in this.
So I mean, I guess we should come to some conclusions.
Well, I just want to say a few things about Coates.
Go ahead.
Like, I think with Coates, I think what I really like about his writing in this issue is that, and he's coming from a background of being a massive comic book fan himself. What I really like is that he has this respect for the history, even stuff that he may not have liked so much happened. He's thought it important enough that you can't retcon out history. History happens and it shapes you and it affects you. And while you may not have liked a particular arc that happened, that's what's happened and that's the state Wakanda's in. So while it does, I think, while the execution of it is a bit confusing, especially in the beginning, I do respect him doing that. And by doing that, we get a T'Challa who is not this badass African shaft going around outthinking everybody and beating everybody up. Instead, we've got someone who was that, but is now having to deal with politics of his nation, and very much so that I think it's likely that older Black Panther in past stories was a king who was a superhero. It feels like this incarnation of T'Challa is a superhero who happens to be king, and it's effective in showing the issues you'd have with that and how they would weigh heavy on someone. And it's I think that the writing is super lyrical and like multi-layered and dense, but in a good way. There's a lot of texture to what characters are saying, and it comes off as being poetic as opposed to didactic, which is something that I feel is quite similar with his written work. As he takes on a lot of serious issues and often from a standpoint of resistance, but instead of preaching at you or instead of telling certain readers off, instead it's a more personal expression that fits the wider whole. It's using the specific to talk about the general, which I think is really interesting and really effective. And what you get is like you have characters, they do like state how they feel, but it comes off as raw data and emotion and not some refined soliloquy of someone stating all the bad things that's happened and all the bad things they intend to do or whatever. And I do quite like
what
that.
I think as well about Coates is the fact that I think it was pretty brave of him actually to not just sling everything in the dumpster and start over, like to take on all the history and try and run with that instead of trying to do like a total reboot, because he could easily have started over and done his own interpretation of Black Panther. Yeah, blank canvas would have been easier for him, I think, but I think it was quite brave of him to go back and to and quite, you know, quite good of him to learn all of that, because he must the amount of research he must have had to do. Yeah. The amount of comics he's had to read.
It's a lot of history.
It's a lot of issues of Black Panther as well. But yeah, he's definitely done a good job of it. I am impressed.
Yeah, I like that point you made, Leon, about the weight of all this fictional history. Like, for good or bad, it's there and it was present and it shaped the character, and that does seem to be a really big part of his own personal philosophy from his external works. I like how he's done that.
Yeah. Let's do some quick conclusions then. So before we move on to the spoilerier bit, what do we think of the book overall? So start with Rahul.
Yeah, honestly, I think I'm going to have to give it another read now that it's been recontextualized for me, because now that I know that it is a continuation, maybe I should go back and reread some of the previous stories, or just get a briefer overview of the character itself, himself, and what his history is. But yeah, like I said, I love the art style. The writing is very lyrical and poetic, and I think sometimes that can be a bit of a barrier as well, because you have to. I've noticed this from reading Coates' articles and books as well, but sometimes because he describes things poetically, you have to go over them a couple of times to understand the point that's being made, as opposed to just the emotion that's being pushed through it. But yeah, I think this definitely warrants and deserves a second read on my part. So I'll.
Yep. Leon?
I liked it.
This is a book that I would definitely recommend, and did recommend to you guys. And I think the main thing it gets right is that it takes the risk of taking a character whose popularity is on the rise in general culture, and instead of using this character as just a conduit of badassery, instead has got the character dealing with a lot of issues, internal and external, and I think that makes the book quite an interesting read. And I think it's handling so much, but it doesn't feel like it's overstuffed. And I think these first 4 issues are a good indication of what is to come. I think it's quite refreshing in terms of how its representation. I think it's done as quite a light hand, and it's not done in a particularly preachy look at us way, which I quite like. And at the base of it, regardless of people's genders, orientations, or ethnicities, everyone feels like a character, and they have the same nuances and shades of grey as everyone else, which I quite like.
Doesn't feel like they're putting stuff in just to tick boxes. Yeah.
No, and it doesn't feel like, oh, well, you've got this like headline writer who is known for writing a lot about race politically, paired with like a character who's going to be like the first, going to have the first like movie for a black superhero. So there's a lot of opportunity there with less depth hands to create sort of a one-note type of character and world, and it's just like, look how awesome these black people are. But I think what it does, it uses all these tensions, borrowing from history and borrowing from like now culture across the whole diaspora, whether it be in America or Africa. And I think it does that very effectively. And I think it's just really cool to have a team which is like 2 black guys and a woman having creative control over quite an interesting and important character, I think it's nice to have these different viewpoints and these different people from different sort of walks of life actually having some more input into some of these mainstream characters, and I think that's very cool. And so far with this first volume, quite effective at the moment.
I think that it is very, very good. I would definitely recommend it. I will be picking up Volume 2. It's definitely one of the better things to come out of Marvel recently. And I'd say go buy it and read it, because I think if you don't, you'd be missing out. I think it's great. So, on to the short spoiler section. So, we're going to be short because there's not a great deal to spoil currently, but there's a few things that we weren't comfortable discussing in too much detail in the main review, because we didn't want to ruin it for you if you intend to read it. So, yeah, let's get started. So, more with the dissolution with the monarchy, which I thought was one of the most interesting points in there. The fact that T'Challa had been attacked, been in a coma, come back, Shuri had been killed by Namor, and so you've got like the justice structure. It's like the main city, the Golden City, like the main city in Wakanda. They're trying to be civilized, and they're trying to be, like have like this like air of I guess trying to be civilized is the wrong word for it. They're trying to have this air of like they want to be, how do I put this? They want to be progressive. They don't want things like the death. They don't want, people just doling out justice where people see fit. They want to sort of, they want laws and everything else, and they're trying to enforce these laws, and they're trying to keep everything under a lid, and it doesn't seem to be working because of what has been going on elsewhere in the country that they're finding difficult to control, is where people are abusing their power, which I mentioned before. Tribal leaders specifically seem to be abusing their power over women a lot of the time. Like the women in Wakanda seem to be getting a bit of a raw deal, and you've got a woman, a former member of the Dora Milaje, who is being sentenced to death for defending a rape victim, and she basically executes this tribal leader for abusing his power and being a rapist, and she's up for execution for it. And although what he was doing was a crime, they're still, it's answering the question and not answering the question at the same time, because they're treating her as having done something awful, and they're gonna do the same thing. It's like eye for an eye, but it's yeah.
Well, the scene is introduced by her partner or another one of the Dora Milaje appealing to Ramonda, which is Black Panther's mother, who is acting in his place while he's away, at least as far as I can tell. And I think the character's name is Aneka. Oh no, sorry, Ayo is defending Aneka, and appealing to the mother by saying she was defending our women, and so why is she being sentenced to death for doing exactly what our brothers should have been doing for years? And Ramonda responds with, how can you appeal to save her by pleading for some other standard? Like, I think that's a really interesting way of putting setting into place the status quo of the justice system in Wakanda currently, where she knows that she has to stick to the structure as it is, because if she doesn't, then it'll set a precedent for who can get away with
whatever they want.
Actions.
That's what I was trying to get. That's what I was trying to get across, because murder is still murder, regardless of the motivation.
You can't. There's no real place for vigilantes, and what that does is hold up the fact of, like we have in our societies, that you have like the rule and letter of the law, but sometimes the institutions fail the very people they should be protecting. But there's no real room to open the door to let people police themselves, because, as you say, that could open the floodgates, and then you lose the rule of law.
I guess what she should have done is apprehended him and brought him to justice instead of, in hot-headedness, murdering him. Is what I think. T'Challa's mother is trying to get across. But then, even then, because of his power and influence, I think he might have gotten away with it.
Yeah, he would have gotten away. Yeah, he would have.
So you've also got, like, on top of this, where you've got these. She's been sentenced, and the person appealing for her freedom happens to be her lover, and you get this whole sort of like breakout scene where they break out and they steal some technology, and they become the Midnight Angels, a sort of like 2-woman vigilante force to be reckoned with at the moment in Wakanda, because like nobody seems to be able to stand up to them, and they seem to be leading the revolution from the inside, and they're going around kicking ass, taking names, making examples of people, leaving dead bodies with messages on them, burning fields, that kind of stuff.
And I do love the contrast between the Midnight Angels' actions and the Black Panther's actions, where they will go in and save an entire group of women who have been captured by these men, and it's a joyous victory at the end. Whereas there's a scene where T'Challa goes in and lays waste to all these men who he believes are holding these women captive, or are doing something malicious, and he says, "Your king." He turns to the women afterwards and says, "Your king will protect you," and she turns around and says, "These men were protecting us." So it's the clear contrast between how Midnight Angels are doing action in the correct way, and T'Challa doesn't quite have the right direction.
Though one thing I do like as a counterpoint with that is that I like at the beginning where like Io is talking to Aneka, and she's saying like, "What was your plan?" You broke me out, and says I didn't really have one. And I do kind of like how you have those contrasts in their personality, where one is the hot-headed doer, and the other one is the more thoughtful, strategic one. So they work great as a team, but like you start to see some, especially in the later issues, you start to see some of the shortfalls of that approach, because once they leave an area, that area is unprotected.
I do like how they got into this whole situation about being vigilantes, because the one who is normally measured in her response is the one who, in an act of a crime of passion, murders the rapist. And she's the one imprisoned, and the one who is, it turns out, is the hot-headed one, has to appeal for her freedom. I like how the roles slightly flip there, and you can tell they're a little bit out of their comfort zones.
And you've got, alongside this, you've got the because it's like a 2-pronged attack. So you've got the people coming in from the outside as well. You've got this border nation of Wakanda, this country that borders Wakanda called Uganda, that is. They've always had beef with the Wakandans, as I've already explained. They've always, they've never liked their neighbours at all. They blame their neighbours for the fact that they're in a shitty place, and they are also trying to. They're basically using this as a way to seize what they see as they're seizing it as an opportunity, I guess. And you've got these two sort of, I don't know if you want to call them revolutionary leaders, because it's not a revolution from the Ugandan side of things, but they are Wakandan people. You've got this shaman called Tetu, who has power over nature and seems to be able to control plants and bring rain and stuff like that. He's like representative of the old world kind of thing, because he's got all these like spiritual shamanistic powers that in total contrast to the way T'Challa fights and the technology that he uses and the vibranium and everything else. This guy seems to be doing just fine without it, And then you've got his partner in crime, Sens, who is I don't know, is she a mutant? I don't know. I get the impression.
It mentions her as being a metahuman when he's analysing her initially.
And she seems to have the ability to, as I've mentioned before as well, bring emotions in people to the forefront. So if people,
which sorry to jump in, but that's an element that I really like, where it's not just they're being mind controlled. Instead, it's a case of like there is that underlying tension, that underlying displeasure, and what all she does is bring that to the
just
surface.
Liberates it. So
she's not controlling their individual actions. She just liberates those emotions and misgivings, and I think that is really interesting because it doesn't really absolve the fact like, oh, it's all good now. We've stopped the mind control person. No, that stuff is there and it's still there.
It's exposed. Because I like this one bit where T'Challa confronts her, and he describes how she's bringing out his internal shame, might, and rage, and because she's brought it out to him, it's brought it out to the people as well. Which I think is
I've got the book in front of me at the moment, and I think she actually refers to herself as a liberator at one point. I'm trying to find it, but yeah, she actually says, "I'm not, I'm a liberator," kind of thing. She actually explains it that all she's doing is just stirring the pot, basically. Rather than actually making people do this she's stirring the pot and they're doing it off their own back, which I think is a pretty cool mechanic. I quite like that. Which is like the miners' right at the beginning of the book, which is where it all sort of starts. Those guys, they weren't happy. They didn't like their king. They're probably not happy with their job and whatever. They have their grumbles. And then she just turns up and she just whips him into a frenzy, and that's it. This is where he's fighting his own people, and he doesn't want to do it, and he hates it. And then people are seeing this on TV, like, why is our king, what people are probably seeing this on TV and whatever in Wakanda, or seeing this through whatever communication they use. I think they have like some kind of like inbuilt computer implanty things and whatever, but they're all like seeing this footage of their own king turning on the people, and this is like further incensing them all, I think.
I don't want to spend too much time on this question, but I was wondering if you guys understood what was happening in that scene, because there's a point where one of his people hands him a spear, and this lightning bolt shoots out from it or down to it, and then, quote unquote, the hate fades from the people. What mechanism was happening there? Like, how did he dispel that spell that she'd had over them? Did you guys understand that?
No. No, I
just took it as given that he had something which
wakes everyone
brought them back to normal. Yeah,
maybe. Yeah,
but I think these kind of things are the things that were confusing me at the time of reading it.
Well, you can see they seem to kind of have like the spears, and they seem to have like a sort of a shock function anyway, because before they hand the spear to him, they're using them on the people anyway, and then when they hand him the spear and he just stamps it into the floor, I think it's like a
pulse
some
or
kind
something.
Of like EMP type thing or whatever that sort of wakes everyone up, some kind of pulse. I'm not quite sure how that works. Maybe it's something to do with his
vibranium.
Yeah, something
Who knows?
It's on the vibranium. Maybe the vibranium carries the signal. I don't know. But
Anyway,
And we've already mentioned how the people react to him trying to save them, as you were mentioning before. He's trying to help his people, but it seems like too little, too late. And I think his mother brings that up to him as well, when they're having that conversation in the sky above the city, which is like I think that's towards the end of book 4. Where they sort of like he's having this conversation with his mother, and his mother's like, look, you need to get them to you need to teach them to trust you again. You need to get on their level, basically, because they're seeing you as this guy way up high in the ivory tower, doling out, angry justice and angry punishment
but in a very distant manner.
Yeah.
And
it seems like T'Challa's not really learning his lesson, because she says that to him in the first issue as well. Like, it's not enough to be the sword; you have to be the intelligence behind it. And if she's saying that to him at the end of issue 4 as well, like, why is he not?
It's like he's almost forgotten how to be king.
And I think that's a major theme. Where it's like I was saying earlier, he's a superhero who happens to be king.
You get the impression that he's just totally blinded to the fact that people don't like him, and he just automatically assumes, well, my people love me, I'm the Black Panther, I'm the guy, but obviously not.
And And I guess he still has like the guilt from all the attacks that happened on Wakanda, and then losing his sister as well.
Yeah, exactly. And to round it all off, you've got the terrorism. So you've got like I think it finishes book 4 actually on like a is it like a would you call is it an Ugandan suicide bombing?
It appears that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. And you know, possibly in an attempt to assassinate him, because he was there in this crowd, and this bombs go off, and he does his best to protect who he can, and I think that's the start of probably going into the other issues. That's going to be the start of something really nasty. That's when it really kicks off. But yeah, you've also got you end up with this is going back now because I forgot to mention it before, but it's where Aneka and Io they team up with the Ugandan side of things, don't they? They have like this conversation with Tetu, and they kind of like start to coordinate their attack, which I think is where it starts to get really sort of dangerous. It's where like
but yeah, it seems like an uneasy alliance.
I don't think they like what they're doing because they still like Wakanda. They still love their country. You know, they were the honor guard of the king for a while. They obviously have the country's best interest at heart, which is why at the start of the book they turned around and snapped their spears and went, "We ain't with you anymore because you haven't got the country's best interest at heart." Which is that panel at the beginning of the book, you know, where it's got Namor, and it's those guys, those. That's the Dora Milaje, like turning around to him and going, "We're done with this, you know, we're quitting the band." So I think you had some little facts and trivia to go through, didn't you, Ray? Because there's some interesting things that you picked up when you were going through this book that you wanted to bring out and speak to us all about. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, actually, one of the things that I was most influenced by from this comic was being introduced to Coates' other outside works. So from reading the comic, I did some research on him and found the articles from The Atlantic, which I passed on to Leon, not realizing that he must have read them years ago, because he's been a fan of Coates for quite a while now. And I have to thank you, Leon, for introducing me to him, because more so than this comic, which I not to say I have mixed feelings on, but like I was lukewarm on because I wasn't really feeling it. His book, Between the World and Me, really struck a chord. Like I really enjoyed that book, and I'm looking forward to reading more of his works going forward. A couple of things I picked up on related to the comic. The poem that it seems that Tetu is reciting at the bookends of that issue are actually a poem by a man called Henry Dumas, who was a young black man who was shot to death in 1968 while going through a turnstile at a New York subway station, shot by a cop. And this is a man who Coates was introduced to at his time at university. And I think it's just nice that he's found a way to put in references to things that influenced him and reintroduce the world, as it were, to lesser known underground poets and artists. So I thought that was a nice touch, and I'll be looking into more of his works maybe. I think his works are also published by Toni Morrison, and I've been meaning to read more of her writings too. So it's things leading on to other things. The other thing I found while looking up more information about Coates and his influences on the Black Panther comic, I found a video on YouTube which is a preview for this comic run, overlaid with music from Run the Jewels, who I know both me and Leon are big fans of. And Run the Jewels, in fact, did a couple of covers, or Marvel did a bunch of covers doing the Pistol and Fist logo from Run the Jewels. And I just think it's kind of cool how it all ties in. And I will leave a link to the show notes for that.
And I have that special edition one for issue 2, I believe it is.
Yes.
For Black Panther.
Very, very jealous of that. It's super cool. And we'll put a link to that.
It is very cool.
Well,
I do like those covers. Yeah. They're very, very, very cool.
Yeah.
So, I guess that wraps it up. Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
So, that's about all. Thanks again for listening, guys. You can find us at Ace Comicals on Facebook. You can find us under at Ace Comicals on Twitter. You can find us on the internet at www.acecomicals.com, which is our new podcast website, run through Fireside. You can find us on iTunes under Ace Comicals, and you will be able to field us any questions, anything you want to ask, through acecomicals@gmail.com. You can also find our blog at acecomicals.wordpress.com. If you want to contact us individually, if you want to ask any questions to us specifically, I guess you can contact me through Twitter at Bato. Ray?
Yeah, at Twitter as well, so that's at Moonke, which is at MOONKEH.
And Leon?
And with me, it's at Leon Everett on Twitter.
Yeah, so thanks for listening, guys. It's been Ace Comicals, over and out.